up, everybody? How we doing? Feeling good? Super excited. It's week 3 of our series, Greener Grass, where we're having conversations about maintaining a healthy marriage. The first week we talked about what men want out of a relationship and what ladies want out of a relationship and how we need to be in communication and work with each other. And then last week, man, was so good. We've gotten so many emails and reports and social media posts about how impactful it was for couples as we talked about navigating divorce and remarriage and infidelity and affairs, and about how in all those things, God has a greater plan for you, right? And so that no matter how broken it might feel, that God has great things in store. And so last week was great. Go listen to it. And then this week, we're talking about a roll in the hay. We're talking about how to have a healthy sex life and how to deal with some of the things that might have happened in the past. And, you know, you could already feel it as Pastor Whitney got up and made the announcement about what we're talking about. Everybody kind of goes junior higher, like in that moment. And you say sex, and everyone's like, you know, and so it's kind of a funny topic. But at the same time, there's also a lot of shame and condemnation that the enemy wants to attach to that topic. And so today, we're not going to let him do that, and we're going to talk about those things. And so you guys already know my wife and I, Rachel, and then Pastor Whitney and her husband, Aaron, my best friend. And so they're going to be on the panel and talk about some of their experiences. But some people that are new to the panel are our friends Kevin and April Blunt. And so been friends with them for a long time and respect them and are excited to get their perspective. How long have you guys been married?
12. Oh, hey,
12 years.
12 years, yes.
2 kids.
2 kids.
Yeah, so they know about sex. They have 2 kids, right? There's proof. And so it's going to be good today as we kind of get into it and talk about it. As we met together this week, the 6 of us met together and talked about what we're going to talk about today. It was really funny at how heavy it was and how much we were giggling and laughing. And so I wish we had like a camera on the wall to really look at the conversation that we had to talk about the importance of intimacy in marriage. So we're going to talk about some heavy things. And so get ready, open up your heart, and I think that it's important. Yeah?
It's good.
It's good.
Yeah, it's good. We're going to talk about it.
We became sexperts.
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 Sexologists.
Sexologists. We came up with all kind of terms
I'm glad there wasn't a camera on the
that
wall.
we said we weren't gonna say in service, but
Yeah,
it's
I don't
okay.
know.
Oh, yeah.
So something we had talked about is that sex isn't talked about in the church a whole lot. It's not something that's really brought up and discussed very often. And why is that? What's our experience been with that?
Well, I think that in today's society, what we've seen in social media and on TV and in movies, that oftentimes it's exploited and there's a negative connotation with it. There's a scandalous connotation with it. And so what we've seen and what we have to guard our hearts and our families with is that, yeah, you turn the TV on, you don't have to look far, you know.
And I think the church spends so much time, at least for me growing up, talking about don't do it, it's bad, stay away from it, that then it would require a lot of work to then talk about the positives of it, and it would require a lot of effort to kind of talk about the difference between, and so they instead just run away from it because it's a lot easier to just say it's bad, stay away from it until you get married. But I think it causes some confusion and harm.
It really does. Yeah.
It's really strategic for the enemy to make sex something that unbelievers can exploit and can utilize to like trade and that type of thing. And then for Christians, for us to feel shame when we talk about sex. Like that's the perfect warfare strategy or tactic,
sure.
you know, for us to like be closed-mouthed about it.
Yeah.
Sex, S-E-X, right?
Right.
Like so that we don't have healthy, godly conversations. That makes a lot of sense, you know, for the enemy to do that.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, especially in the church, you know, like you said, we have kind of made it a bad thing almost, and there's a stigma that goes with it.
Yeah.
You know, but God made man and woman and told them to go, you know, be fruitful and multiply.
Right, exactly.
You know, and so that's having sex,
Yeah.
you know? And so
I remember growing up in church, my youth pastor did a relationship series, and at the end of the series, he broke up the guys and the girls and sent all the girls into another room and kept all the guys. And then he showed us this horrible video of like STDs and like all these images, and like got up and said like, if you have sex, you're gonna get someone pregnant, you're gonna get AIDS. And I was like, what? Like sex is of the devil. And so there was this thing that I was kind of indoctrinated that sex is of the devil. And can I tell you, that's not true.
Right.
Sex is a gift from God
Amen.
Amen.
that we need to understand and operate in. Now, sex is a gift from God within the context of biblical marriage. One man, one woman is biblical marriage, and that in that context, that God wants sex to be fun. He wants us to enjoy our spouse. He wants us to enjoy the body that he's given us. And so today we're going to talk about it. And so it might be a little odd and a little awkward at moments, but that's okay. We're the ones up here, right? You just get to like sit there and be like, oh my God, I can't believe they're talking about all of those things.
Yes. No, it's so good.
So Aaron talked about it, but I think that society glamorizes things about sex that God did not intend, and so we need to be aware about that. One of the big things that we really talked about is how important it is that as moms and dads that we talk to our kids.
Yeah,
about
for us, I
sex.
mean, we have junior high and high school kids, and I said it in announcements, but I'm serious. If they're not talking about it with me, I've learned that they're talking about it with somebody else.
Right.
And so I'd much rather them have the understanding of what we believe and what we say about it than to be talking about it with somebody else, and to not in the culture that I grew up in, it was not something I felt comfortable asking my parents about. And I went through a lot of confusion and hurt in my life because of that. And so I just want to make sure for my kids that they always have an open door and that there's a constant conversation happening of knowing what we believe, what's happening.
Yeah.
And I think with what we're doing today and what we did in the first service, we're at least opening a door
Right.
for us as parents to be able to start having the conversation with the kids in the house. So that
Yeah.
way we can start talking about it.
I mean-
There's a guy at my work, I was going to say real quick, there's a guy at my work who we were just talking casually one day, and he said that his 14-year-old came to him and said, hey, Dad, I'm surprised. We hadn't had the talk yet. And he looked at him and said, what? The talk yet? No, you got to go take out the garbage, and you got to clean the dishes. You got to do all these things before we have the talk. We don't just have the talk anytime. You got to do all these things. And I looked at him and I said, man, what are you doing? He's
Right.
literally coming to you, laying it all out, being vulnerable, like a 14-year-old has to try to do sometimes, laying it out to you and saying, hey, the talk,
Right.
and you just like close that door. Man, you can't do that, because if
Right.
you're not going to, he's going to get us from
Yeah.
somewhere else.
Yeah, Dad, you're blowing the opportunity. The door's wide open, and you're saying, no, we can't talk
Well,
about it.
and
now."
whenever I was doing research for my master's degree, one of the statistics that I came across was that the national average is at 9. Children are experiencing some sort of sexual act, not necessarily sex, but that's
9
the
years
national
old.
average.
9
Yeah,
years
at
old.
9 years old. So middle school may be too late. Junior high and high school, you may have missed out on 5 years that
Right.
you could have been giving them good information.
I think it's important to understand that having the talk is not something to be avoided because of your fear or the awkwardness you may encounter in that, but really pray and seek the opportunities to start a dialogue, a conversation. So when your kids at whatever age are already faced with what the world says sex is, your kids are already not battling any of the thoughts or not in wonder because they already know what God thinks about it.
Right.
Yeah, and like I'm a high school teacher. That's my day job. I just come up here and talk about sex for fun, But my day job is a high school teacher.
It's ridiculous.
I can guarantee you, if you are not having this conversation with your children,
Right.
they are getting it somewhere else.
Right.
And some of the stuff that they say, I'm like, what in the world? And
Right.
99% of it is not biblical and
Right.
and not spoken the way it needs to be spoken about.
Right. So, like Rachel said, it's not just about having the talk, like
Right.
the one time we sit down and talk about the birds and the bees. But that as moms and dads, we need to intentionally have dialogue. We need to start a conversation with our kids when they're little about things they see and about things people will say to them, and as they get older, about holding hands and kissing and touching. And we need to open that dialogue, or else what happens in them is shame comes on, and then now they're doing something and lying to mom and dad. You know how I know that? Because I was a high school kid.
Right.
And if I did it then, God knows they're doing it now. And so we need to kind of beat the devil at his own game and start having the conversation.
And you can't, when you do talk about it, it can't be a condemnation-filled talk. you've got to speak to them in love, and you've got to speak to
Right.
them in a biblical manner. You can't attach condemnation to it, or else that's what they're going to continue to carry
Yeah.
with it for the rest of their life.
And I think that it's important to talk to our kids with the understanding that sex is a gift from God.
Yes.
That God made us, He formed our bodies, and He gave us sex as a gift. He told us to be fruitful and multiply and to fill the earth. But the reason it feels good is because He wanted to give us a gift, if I can just be really honest, right? If God didn't want it to feel good, He wouldn't have made it feel good. It would have been
Right.
like blowing your nose or something. It would have just been like really, He would have
No, it
just
would
made
have
it
been a
as though
systematic
it's just a
thing.
systematic
That's
procedure
right.
that we have to do to create children. But instead, He said, you know what? I love my creation. I want to give them this gift. And out of that is the opportunity for us to have intimacy. Here at Living Church, we want to be party starters.
Yeah.
We need party starters here on earth so that there can be parties started in heaven
And in the bedroom.
and in the bedroom, right?
Party starters in the bedroom, yes.
Yeah, we want to be party starters in the bedroom. And so we have to talk about it.
Well, and sex is not just for men. It's not women. It's not slutty to enjoy sex with your
Amen.
husband.
Right,
Hallelujah.
that's good.
That's a wonderful
That's right.
thing.
Yeah.
They
That's
want
right.
you to enjoy it.
But
you
yet
know?
there's this weird stigma
Yes.
that if a woman is interested in that, even with her husband, then she's looked down upon.
Right.
Right.
That as men, it's painted that we're supposed to be these sexual deviants,
Right.
and women aren't supposed to be
Yeah,
interested.
like y'all are always supposed to be in charge. That's not how it goes. It's good to take charge.
See, so
No, oh God, everyone got stressed out. No, it's a gift from God. And for as women, we also have needs and desires. Yes.
so
there.
we
Go
talked
on,
about
move.
together
the
what
next thing.
what is it that we're talking about. So to define what we're talking about when we say sex, we're not only talking about intercourse.
Right.
Right? I mean, intercourse is sex. But that if I were to talk to you about what sex was, I would say that anything that is a sexual act, right? That if you're talking about oral sex, if you're talking about feeling somebody up, if you're talking about practicing with one of those shake weight exercises, right? Whether together or alone, right? Like wherever you are in the context that's what we're talking about. And you
Right.
might say, well, Pastor, I don't really agree with you because I'm single and I'm not married, and so I understand that intercourse is sex, but I have needs, and so I'm going to do this other sexual thing, and so I'm going to have oral sex and not call it sex.
No.
Same thing, man.
Right.
There's still this sexual activity, and I would ask, if you had a 14-year-old daughter, would you tell her that?
Right.
No. I mean,
No.
so I think the definition that we want our children to operate in is the same definition that we need to operate in.
Well, God-
And so when we're saying sex, I'm not just talking about like missionary position, like husband, wife. I'm talking about that all of the activity that we would have sexually, we need to be intentional about.
No, God created sex so that we would, it's the greatest form of intimacy
Right.
for us and our spouse. And so anything that would be, any body parts, any of that would be an intimate act, that's something that is sex. It's created
Okay,
for a
we
man
all on
and
the
wife.
same page of what we're talking
Yeah.
about then? Okay, they're gonna be real quiet today. That's okay. So something that I know is that personal purity influences intimacy. That your personal purity, it influences intimacy. And I think that something that we talked about together is that a lot of times we can bring baggage into our relationships because of choices we made in the past, because we weren't pure, and so now that affects our intimacy today.
That's true. I'll say this. Whenever we got married 16 years ago, one of the things that we had to talk about and communicate was that the baggage that was brought into our marriage was different. Whitney had less baggage than what I brought into the marriage. And
Right.
so there was a level of purity that I didn't have, whereas my wife did. And so one of those things that we had to do is discuss it. And I mean, I had to give it to God. She did too. But it was something that was not easy.
Right.
And so one of the reasons why we're talking about this today is so that way, understand, God is a redeeming God. He forgives. But if you can keep from bringing additional baggage into your
So good.
your marriage or your relationship, you're going to be all the better for it.
Right. Because what you think is so exciting in one moment, in another season of life brings hurt to somebody else. And so as you're single, I think pursuing purity is really important so that you can walk into the future without that.
Well, and I think for me too, the same story as Aaron, that I came into our marriage not a pure person. And, you know, Trustin's motto was stronger than Samson. He's going to overcome temptation, you know, and his battle was that. For me, I felt like I was ruined. I walked in condemnation for years where I couldn't even worship without seeing and feeling the things that I had done before. And so, you know, walking into the marriage, understanding that the marriage is also the act of God's mercy and grace over your life, including sex. And so don't exclude that part out. That's all covered in it.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that it's important to note for some of us, purity, that's taken from us. It's not a choice that we've made. I know for me, it was a choice that I made after I had it taken from me, you know, at 12 years old. And I think that that's a really difficult thing for us to think through, because you think, how will I ever be deserving of a godly marriage? How will I ever be deserving of a whole relationship with God and with my spouse? And then you make other decisions because there's pain from that
Right.
you're not necessarily proud of, that you did consciously make the choice to do and to engage in. But I think that, like they're saying, there is no condemnation. Once you have given that to God, He has taken that from you, it's nailed to the cross. You don't have to keep it
good,
again.
April.
And so in your marriage, it's so important to be honest about that, to be genuine. And hey, this is a moment, and please do not think that just because it's nailed to the cross, your memory is wiped, because it's not.
Yeah.
Your memory is still there of all the things that you experienced, of all the things that you did and went through. But when you have that conversation with your spouse, it helps to level the playing field. And I think that that's why we want to talk about how important purity is before, when you do have the choice. For
Yeah.
those of you who don't, I know what that's like, and I will pray for you. And I hate that it has happened to you. But for those of us who make that choice, I think that that's one of those things you have to understand, or you have not had the opportunity yet, and you're maybe thinking about it. If you enter your marriage with that purity, you have no idea how much easier it is to battle all of the things that the enemy throws at
Yeah.
you.
A stat that I read this week was that 1 in 4 women are sexually molested before they're 16. And the enemy wants nothing more than to take that thing and to create shame in your life and make it feel like you're dirty because of something somebody else did to you. But I have my friends Kevin and April on the stage so that you can see God redeems all things.
Yeah.
That no
Amen.
matter what's happened, that God can redeem that thing that you did.
Well, I truly believe that you can't have a healthy marriage without a healthy sex life. And so I think the enemy uses every tool
Right.
that he possibly can to come in to bring separation between you and your spouse. What God brought together, he's trying to tear down. And so the communication between each other, and then the communication with counseling. We've talked about it 100 times through this series because we believe in it, that counseling is something that can help you walk from what was to now what is, and
Yeah.
help you in your journey so that you can have a healthy marriage and
Yeah.
a healthy sex life.
Yeah, we've been talking about counseling throughout the series, and so we have some information we're going to throw up on the screen about a counseling group. Rachel and I went and saw the lady who runs this counseling group for our premarital counseling, and we've seen counselors within their network. And so they would be a great resource of Christian counselors you could connect with. And I know that you're going like, I want to take a picture of that or write it down, but then the people I'm sitting next to will think I'm a weirdo. So we're going to post it on social media this afternoon and post a link so that you guys can get that. But really, I think it's important to have some of those conversations to help you find.
Well, and one other thing I was
Healing.
thinking about is with regards to purity and having those conversations, as parents, it's really important. It kind of gives you one more reason to have these conversations. It helps you so that they can have pure marriages. When you have those conversations, when it's not something you're afraid to talk about, when you recognize this is what's right and this is what's wrong, then you're not nervous to have those discussions
Smart.
with your
Yeah.
parents. And then that helps you to maintain that
With
purity.
your kids, yeah. So for Rachel and I, our experience was, like she said, she had a boyfriend before me that she had made some mistakes with. And I had been really intentional growing up to fight those things and just said, I'm not going to get a girlfriend. I'm just going to stay away from girls because I don't trust myself. But just because I didn't make mistakes with an actual person doesn't mean I didn't make mistakes with an actual person. And so though I hadn't went out and done a lot of the things that many of my friends had done, I was still looking at stuff I shouldn't be looking at. I was still watching pornography. I was still allowing this negative influence to come into my life. And can I tell you, that might be worse baggage than the first. and had all these thoughts and all these things that I allowed into my mind that we really needed to deal with. And pornography, it'll mess you up, man. I've got some stats that I want to share, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit. 34% of internet users have been exposed to unwanted porn via ads and pop-ups. 34% of us, including your 9-year-old kids.
In second grade, we got an email that they were doing a research project.
When your kids were in second grade.
When one of my kids was in second grade, sorry. They were doing a research project in the classroom, and one of the kids typed in whitehouse.com, and that's a porn site. And it came up before the school filter was able to shut it down, and all the kids were exposed to it in the second grade.
Right.
And so
Porn sites receive more regular traffic than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. Porn is a $97 billion industry per year. In 2016 alone, more than 4,500,000,000 hours of porn were watched on the world's largest website. That's just one website, that many hours. Visitors of this one website watched a total of 91 billion videos in 1 year. 91 billion videos. This figure equates to every human being on the planet, man, woman, and child, watching 12 pornographic videos. So, I mean, it's an epidemic. It's something that's out there. Here's why those stats are important. Porn increases marital infidelity by 300%. 300%. That when you're engaging and you're looking at something that you would consider not infidelity or not an affair, it's doing something in here. And so we need to be intentional about having purity in ourselves. Like we said last week, you have to have a healthy me before we can have a healthy we. 64% of people 13 to 24, men and women, actively seek out pornography weekly or more often. 64% of men and women. So it's not just something that guys struggle with, it's something that is for everybody. 44% of those who viewed pornography reported that online pornography gave them ideas about what kind of sex they wanted to try. And so we're watching these things, and it's influencing how we engage in our relationship.
And so with such crazy, over-the-top numbers that you just mentioned, it's real easy for us to think, man, if this is considered baggage, and I've been one of the statistics that Tristan just mentioned, this is tough to come into my soon-to-be marriage with. It's a heavy bag to carry, right?
Yeah.
But we need to understand that we serve a forgiving God.
That's right.
And
That's
that
good.
we are able to be forgiven. And the biggest thing is just bringing things out of the darkness and into the light. Yeah. And that's with God, that's with yourself, and that's with your spouse. You got to make sure you do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to be a bag that's going to get really heavy to carry for a long time.
because they can be really conflicted. Your spouse can be like, I'm not pleasing you and I don't understand. Because she can't possibly, or he can't possibly live up to what you're expecting them to when you have these unattainable expectations seen on the internet, you know?
Right.
And it's so
Pornography
important.
is like, I could do a whole teaching. I've done it before. When I was a young adult pastor, I did a whole sermon called Solo Sex and talked about how we have to be intentional about the attack that the enemy would bring into our life, that pornography accesses the same reward center in your brain as cocaine because it's a stimulant. And so what happens, like Pastor Whitney was saying, is we can look at something that a regular person can't ever hold a candle to. You can be married to a beautiful woman, but if you're getting online and looking at pornography, you're looking at all different body types, all different shapes and sizes, all different ethnicities, all different kind of situations.
Yeah.
And one person cannot compete with the chaos of pornography that literally is shot in a studio with bright lights and airbrushing. Like, it's not possible. And so what it does is it perverts your reality, and then it makes reality not as pleasing as God intended it to be.
Oh, yeah. I was listening and thinking about everything he was saying, but it doesn't just apply to the men. Ladies, you have to be aware to be to make boundaries about what you're watching, what you're fantasizing about. Just because you're watching Lifetime and all these women's shows about these amazing men that can do all the things right at all the right times, and your mind escapes to the false reality, that's also something you have to be aware of to guard yourself from.
Right. I remember when the book 50 Shades of Grey came out, and my neighborhood little posse, they all bought it, and so I bought it, and I started reading it, and I was like, whoa, I cannot read this book. I got to put it away, throw it away, because it was erotica porn. It's really what it was. I can't go see Magic Mike because Channing Tatum is going to make me think that that is how he's supposed to be, and he's never going to be
I'm not
Channing
Channing
Tatum,
Tatum.
y'all.
I'm not.
And so I'm going to be real
cannot be
mad
him.
and disappointed, you know? And so I had to recognize as a woman that I think sometimes we talk about the men staying pure so much and we focus on that, but we have to stay pure too. We have to be intentional. For me, I have ladies in my life that I can be accountable to say, hey, here's where I'm struggling, because we have struggles too. It's real. The enemy's out to steal and kill and destroy. We'll talk about it over and over again,
Right.
and that's the way he's trying to do it.
Well, I was just gonna say, emotional purity is so important. You know, you have coworkers, or you have friends that are of the opposite sex, or you have friends whose spouses you're like, well, I don't know why you can't be like that. I mean, that.
The
why,
grass is always greener.
Yeah. So we also have to have not just physical purity, but also emotional purity.
And I think knowing and setting your boundaries, I know for us, we randomly even tell them there's people that want, just because your grass looks awesome, they will Facebook message you and be like, hey, remember we used to go out? We've had people message us, and you have to be alert because those conversations.
I had an old girlfriend reach out to me,
Yeah.
like, what? Where did this chick come
Right,
from?
right.
And so I replied to her and added Rachel and her husband. It was like,
Bam.
hey, good to hear from you. Never heard from her again.
Right. Well, and then for me, I've had
Same thing.
the same thing happen, and it's like, yeah, I don't respond because I know what are you doing? It's like midnight. I know what you're trying to do,
Right.
but it ain't working.
He's trying to
Well-
get shot, is what he's trying to do. That's what he's trying to do.
Hey,
I'm
but
real
listen.
nice on Sunday, but that's a whole different situation.
But listen,
Gotta
when
protect,
you're
y'all.
not guarded,
Protect.
when you're not guarded, I'm telling you, if you're not guarded, you are nobody. No one sitting on the stage or sitting on the chairs or
No.
on TV anywhere is above what the enemy's
That's right.
trying to do.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you have to have communication. Again,
Yeah.
it goes back to that. A few years ago, Aaron came to me again. It's what he talked about, taking the things out of the darkness into light. And he said, hey, there's this lady that just started working at the business next door to my office at the airport. And he said, I don't know why. She has no reason to, but she keeps finding reasons to come into my office, to ask me questions, to see if she could get my cell phone number. I'm not giving it to her, and all these things. But he had to communicate to me so that I could be aware of what was happening, but to help guard and protect against it.
And
It was great because she came to my office a lot more often.
Right.
It was really great.
Yeah, because
But
I'm going
see-
to fight
Gotta see
you.
her more.
I'm going to fight you. I will.
And this is something I really, really felt it laid on my heart in the first service, and I feel like it's being laid on my heart again. With all the statistics, there are people in this room that are being affected by this.
Right.
And you might say, it's okay, I got it under control. It's not affecting anything. But it's affecting your spirit.
That's right.
All right, and it's bringing in this evil spirit into your home. And if you have kids, you might be modeling, a perfect relationship for your kids. But if you're allowing the spirit to come into your home, you're allowing the spirit to come into where your kids are.
Yeah, that's right.
And it doesn't matter what you tell them. We're waging a spiritual warfare.
That's right.
And that spirit is in the home with your children.
Right.
So you might think you have it under control,
Right.
but it's there.
Right. The battle that we fight isn't one against flesh and blood, but it's against principalities and powers. And so we need to understand that there's a spiritual battle for our purity and for our kids' purity. The Bible talks about how every sin a man commits is outside of his body, except sexual sin. It's a sin that's committed inside and even against your own body. And so it's really important that we're intentional with it. And what Aaron said was really wise. Sometimes, like I know as guys that if there's, I'm out really involved with the Chamber of Commerce and some different committees and things here in the city, and so I'm interacting with a lot of women and people and relationships, and every once in a while I'll meet a woman and I have to come home and tell Rachel, be like, hey, I met this lady today and she's trouble with a capital T. Yeah. And guys, you know them. Like, when you see a lady that you work with or somebody, you're going, God's trying to get somebody's attention right there.
Wake up. Here we go.
And you meet somebody and you know their trouble. You know their trouble. The natural reaction is to go, oh, I'm not going to tell anybody about this because then she might think that I want to get with her and it's going to create this problem. Well, in healthy communication, it really helps set up boundaries. And the same thing, ladies, like guys that you work with or people that you're in a relationship with that they're flirting with you and they're trying to get a little too friendly. And so it's important to just say, hey, I want you to know I'm creating a boundary so that this thing won't
Because
turn
they
into
are
something else.
sent on a mission from
Right.
the devil.
Right.
He
No,
hired
it's
them
true.
to come to steal and kill and destroy
It's true.
your marriage,
It's
and you
totally
got to
true.
fight it.
So I think that we need to have some boundaries that we set up. We need to have boundaries in our life. I know that there should be no hidden things. That there shouldn't be anything hidden in marriage. Rachel can have my cell phone, my iPad, my laptop. She can have anything. And it wasn't always like that. There was times I'd be like, yeah, I'll give it to you in a couple minutes, right? Let me delete something. My password's changed. I don't know what it is. I'll send it to you later. That's not healthy. That's because I'm trying to hide something that I don't want my wife to be aware of. But we have to be open and honest and drag that stuff out of darkness and into the light. And so I would challenge you, give each other your passwords, give each other access to your email. Rachel's not creeping my phone all the time. It's not like every day I get home and she's like, give me your phone, let me see who you're texting. But because that's a whole other issue. But I'm not afraid to let her see it. She can see anything she wants to see.
Well, and there's, some of you may look at that and say, well, he's just whooped. No, he's wise. And so you have to understand that there's strength in his knowing that where his weaknesses are. And so he protects and guards himself for us. He wears a ring over here on this finger that says Lillian Titus, because what he does doesn't just affect him internally, but it affects us spiritually, physically, and everything as a family. And so his strength gives me comfort. So I'm not having to be insecure and checking his texts and emails and all the things.
But the Bible says that it's in our weakness that he becomes strong.
Right.
And so when we can identify, okay, I've had a problem with this in the past, so I have to set up some safeguards and some boundaries. So I have internet accountability, right? That anything I search is sent to Rachel and multiple other accountability partners. And I say, well, man, that's weak. No, that's wisdom.
Yeah.
Because what the devil's going to do is he's going to attack you in a place that he's found success in the past.
Right.
He's not going to come to you and attack you with something that you've never had a struggle with. Right. But if you were an alcoholic for a lot of years, he's going to keep attacking you with alcoholism.
Right. Yeah.
Because he already found a doorway into your life. Right. Same thing with me, same thing with anybody on the panel.
And he'll provide opportunities too. He'll
Exactly.
bring literally the enemy through a person's body into your life so that he could try to trip you up and make you stumble.
That's right.
And that's just another one of the goals that he has.
Yeah. So we need to create some boundaries that are really intentional. Anything else on boundaries or no? Okay. Next thing that we talked about is that in marriage pertaining to sex, that there are different seasons. There are some seasons that things are hot and heavy, and there's some seasons that things are light and cold, right? And it's not quite as much happening. And I think that that's important to understand those seasons. I know I've talked about here before at the church that when we were in the building renovation, I was overwhelmed and stressed out, and there was other transition and stuff happening in the church, and there was so much in me that I was kind of losing my mind. And in that season, I started to think I was broken because I was not pursuing intimacy. I was not pursuing my wife sexually, which if you would have came and told me that when I was 25, I'd been like, nah, that's impossible, right? But then in this season, like all of this anxiety and all of this stuff came on me, and I wasn't pursuing her how I was, and it created trouble in our marriage. It created trouble for me because I thought I was broken. It created insecurity for her because she thought, is he not attracted to me? Has he stepped outside of the marriage? Is he looking at pornography? Does he have a girlfriend on the side? Like, why is he not pursuing me?
It can happen more than you think,
Yeah.
and in a variety of ways. At a stressful situation that you're going through, I went through a heavy season just about a year ago now when my brother passed. a very traumatic situation that I've never experienced such a loss in my life. And with that came a drought sexually with my wife. And I didn't connect dots. I didn't understand. And when that happened, again, I didn't realize it. However, she knew, obviously, she knew things were happening and we weren't connecting. And it got to a point where she was wondering, like, what's wrong with me?
Right.
What's going on with me? Does he not have an attraction with me anymore? And so it did take communication that we'll talk more about in our marriage. And then also counseling for me. I had to go to see a professional regarding the season that I went through, but then also talking to him about the fact that there was a drought there. And I didn't know and understand, but the physiology that comes along with it and with our bodies, it's connected, y'all. It can very easily transfer over from one to the other. And so it's one of those things that he taught me about things in my body that I didn't understand, that I didn't know about, and had to make sure that I communicated with her so that way there was understanding on her part and also an understanding on my part as well. It was important. It was really revealing.
And I think that, it's a little awkward to talk about because as guys, what we're portrayed as are these sexual conquest beings, like, they don't, And
No,
so
that's
we feel,
why-
like
that's
we
why
feel
we
like
did.
we feel like that's what we're supposed to be.
Right.
And then you can have this season where that's not who you are, and then you get nervous. So I went to, and Aaron and I are best friends, and we just talked about this week and didn't realize that we did this. So I went to the doctor in this season. This couple years ago, I went to the
As did
doctor
I.
and had blood work done and was like, do I need to go to one of those low T centers? Like, what's happening in me? And the doctor said, no, you could be a testosterone donor. You don't have a testosterone problem, but you have something broken up here that you need to work on up here, and it's affecting everything else. And so we walked through this season in our marriage that caused all of these struggles within our intimacy, and it made it awkward and like we can't really talk about it, and what's the problem? And until we went into counseling and talked about it, we couldn't really get over it.
Yeah, for us, I mean, that's, I think, what happens because the world has taken sex and made it so men are these domineering, whatever, all this thing. That's, for me, how it felt. Then, I must not be doing it right. I must not be attractive. I must not be all kinds of things, again, that the enemy was bringing in to bring separation. But the communication, I was communicating in life because I understood he was going through a hard season and that he was depressed and struggling. And so in life, I was there and I was kind and I was gracious. But in the bedroom, I was frustrated and ticked off, And so
She didn't understand, and I didn't either.
Right.
I didn't understand.
So he
I
did
don't
the
know why.
same. He did the blood test. He did all the thing, and we finally came to the root of it. But we found that the communication is the whole thing of what helped us be able to fix it and be able to
And
go on
through
to the
that
next.
restoration was able to occur.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's important just as, men go through all their seasons too, and there's loss and all the thing, but women, we get to have babies. And there's a joy in all the babies and all that, but there's also a really awkward season
What
there.
happens to our bodies, y'all? I mean, oh my word.
And I never knew that.
Right.
Thankfully, I have friends that can walk me through that, but we've got to be respectful of each other in the seasons that you're in and have
Yeah.
understanding of that.
It's good.
For sure.
Well, and I think for us, our dry season was probably closer to the beginning because I was still trying to work things out and what had happened in our past or my past. And compassion it just goes such a long way. Spouses, I have an enormously compassionate husband. I have a godly husband. I was telling the first service, like he comes from a legacy of prayer. His grandmothers were praying for his spouse when he was in the womb. So thank you, Jesus, that happened. So wrap each other in prayer, wrap your children, spouses in prayer right now. But we had to talk about a lot of different things because there were times where, just like in the middle, it's like, nope, sorry, I'm reliving a moment. Nope, go away, go away, go away. And he's like, okay, sorry. And he, if he didn't have compassion for me, if he didn't have an understanding, if he just got angry, I mean, we wouldn't still be married like we are today. And we have a very healthy marriage. We have a very healthy sex life. Part of our health in marriage is our sex life. Yeah. So you have to understand as the spouse who maybe doesn't get what baggage we have, you have your own, but you don't get necessarily our baggage. There has to be some compassion. There have to be questions. There have to be moments of holding us when we're crying or, or if you don't feel like it, but we're in the mood, then you have to like, okay, I got this. You know what I mean? There just have to be open lines, open channels all the time.
And one of the ways I was able to have that compassion was because we had talked about everything that had happened to her and
Right.
everything that she had to go through before we ever even got married. So I knew exactly
What she'd been
what
through.
had happened.
Right.
And was it hard? Yes. Was I frustrated sometimes? Yes. But I also knew, like, I can't be a reminder of that.
Yeah.
And so by having that communication, we were able to walk through it, and we were able to fight through it. And
But that's the
No, it's all
important
good.
part. That's the important part, that we all had a dry season because of something that happened. But we had to fight through it.
Yeah.
Because God gave us our spouse so that we could enjoy ourselves and enjoy each other, but we have to fight through what the enemy's trying to steal away. But what can happen is that season with Rachel and I, it could have affected the rest of our lives.
Right. Easily.
And we could have just went from not having sex for 3 months to not having sex for 6 months or a year to 10 years, and then you're
And
broken.
just a roommate.
Then you're just a roommate. And you know, after we had kids, it kind of felt a little bit like that. Like, we're just fulfilling life together. Like, okay, you get the bottles and you put the new diaper on and you go make the bed. You ever been
sleep
there?
tonight.
You
Right,
got
like,
kids
sleep
in the
tonight, I'll
bed,
stay up.
sleeping in the bed, coming in the bedroom at all times of the day and night.
Yeah, and so that changed a lot of stuff for
Yeah.
us sexually.
And I think that's a time in a season when you have to recognize, talking about seasons, that it's not always the romantic
Right.
roses and steak dinner that you had on maybe your honeymoon. You know, that season was so romantic and sweet and wonderful. But yeah, maybe it's a quickie 15 minutes that you have while the one kid's napping and the other one's occupied with little Einsteins or something. And so you have to find the way to fulfill each other's needs.
Yeah.
you just go
McKinley's
block the
dying.
door with a chair.
Sorry,
and,
Mick.
you know.
Talk about
You
it.
Our
have to
kids are crawling under their chairs right now.
You have to be, sometimes in seasons you have to be very strategic, you know, like you have to plan times to do it. You do. It's important that you do that, because if not, when do you connect in this
Right.
crazy life? Life goes by so fast, and before you know it, you're very distant, and you need that intimate connection because it's an assignment from God.
Yeah, it's good.
Definitely. You just have to be aware of the seasons that, or times in your life where that season is going to be a little more dry. And if you're in community with people, you know, Kevin and I, one of our thing is we have family that live really close, so they're constantly saying, which they want grandchildren, so they're like, okay, when are you going to go for the weekend? But we do that for people in our life too. We like to have kids come and stay at our house, or we'll stay with your kids so that you can have a weekend away, because it is important for you to find time to block that out, make it a priority
Yeah.
where you can have, you know, if it's intimate time or if it's just time to talk and kind of
Right.
regroup and plan for the next season. You need to be able to do that. So
Yeah.
if you need to find us after,
They did
We'll
it for
help you
they did it
out.
for
Yeah,
us.
they
in
They
a season.
babysat is
It's
what they're
important.
saying.
They
They babysat.
they'll take your kids. They did it for us in a season, and they didn't even know at the time how valuable it was to us. But
Yeah.
they took our kids far away for a night, and we were able to communicate. And
They
then
spoiled them rotten, and now
yeah.
they want to go back again. So
yeah,
we're
but
like,
we
"Oh,
were
sure,
able to
go."
communicate, and we were able to have our time, which is so valuable and important.
Yeah. When Rachel and I first got married, we had somebody tell us that every time we had sex, to take a marble and put it in a glass
In
jar.
a glass jar for the first year, just the first year. And they said, and then once you're done that first year, every time you want to have sex, take the marble out and make it a goal to get rid of all the marbles throughout your marriage. In the
So like the first year, there's like 1,000 marbles in the jar or some absurd number of marbles. And then like we get to having kids, right?
Yes, right.
And so like it was when we had Titus, like we're
Yeah.
in the building renovation, she
Right.
just had Titus.
We
and
lost the
that,
can
that,
of marbles.
that
We don't
1,000
even know
marbles
where it
turned into
went.
like 9 or something like that. And it's like, dude, we're broken. Like
yeah,
what
but
is
you
happening?
know, when you first get married, you don't, and it's not it. You know, people laugh about it, but you're enjoying the season that you're in. But have a reality that seasons come, and so you've got to adapt to them and communicate.
Yeah,
That's
for
the biggest portion, and then continue and start up back again when
Yeah.
that season's done.
Yeah, but we weren't intentional in that season.
Right.
And so you have to be intentional to get over some of the hurt. Something else we talked about a lot is perspective, that sex, it should be about the other person, that it's not just about you, but it's about what you're giving. So let's talk about that.
Well, in seasons, that can be really important too. I think for us, like when we had babies in that season, that was something I wasn't super excited about, but I was aware that he had needs that needed to be fulfilled. And so it's important. It's important to be selfless. That's always the underlying theme in
Yeah,
marriage.
and you know, if you're not feeling it, just take care of your man, or vice versa.
Help a brother
Help
out
him
every once in a
out.
while.
It's you can consider in banking terms a deposit, but you're making an investment
Right.
in your marriage, in your spouse, in your significant other, and in yourself.
Yeah.
So it's important to make sure that you're considering it as an investment, a long-term, high-yield investment in your marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a service that you can barter. You know, it's
So
not
good.
something that you can withhold from your spouse. It's not something that you can trade. Well, if you do this or get me this, then maybe we can do that. It's not like that. It can't be like that. But I think as long as you're communicating and you're very open about, well, this is what I like or this is what I don't like, then I think that's the situation in which you're honoring one another. You're dying to yourself, to your own needs, and for that particular pleasure or whatever.
Yeah, and I think you also kind of, you need to know your spouse. You need to know, like their love language. I know that it's not a barter system, but I know that if she comes home and the dishes are done and dinner's on the table, I'm probably going to get lucky. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you don't have to barter with it, but be smart with it. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Did-
And
Well, I think it's healthy. I think it's healthy that direction. That like I'm going to do this
Right.
thing because my wife enjoys when I have the house clean or I do whatever this
'cause
is.
then I'm not
And then
tired.
out of that, because you're, well, no, really, but because time, because you're investing one place, there's able to have a connection somewhere else. But if it's flipped around, then that starts to become dangerous when you're withholding and you're saying, I'm not going to do this.
While we're on this subject, can I say this? Hurt, a lot of times, if not dealt with, almost always becomes selfishness,
Yeah.
and it becomes unfair to a marriage. And so, where there's been hurt, if you're not growing, it's time. Because the outcome of that is selfishness, and selfishness really is just about you.
Yeah.
So good.
Anything else on that?
Well, April talked about it before. It's an emotional investment too,
Yeah.
and so you have to recognize that the perspective of sometimes it's my night or sometimes it's your night is because of the emotional investment you've made in me and and so because of that, I'm able to be selfless on a night and say, hey, let's take care of your needs and not worry about me today, or vice versa. But because we're healthy emotionally as well, and I think that's so important.
Right, because it's communication.
Well, and I was just going to say, whenever you start to feel that drought, goes back to the seasons and communication, all of that. But when you start to feel like, well, I'm not getting my sexual needs fulfilled from you, it's so easy for us to look outside of our marriage. It's so easy for us to lie to ourselves or let the enemy lie to us and say, well, we're no longer in love, when it's not love. Love is a choice. You
So
wake up
good.
every single morning, you say, I'm going to die to myself for this person, just like Jesus died for us, right, for the church. That's the way we're supposed to treat our spouses. And if you're at the very first hint of trouble, if you're willing to look outside, there's never going to be a restoration. And you yourself will never feel the healing that Jesus wants for us.
Yeah.
So, and then that's just from a personal perspective. I have been broken. I have looked for other things to fill that hole, that void. And it didn't matter if I had the perfect Channing Tatum body with, William Shakespeare's sonnets. It didn't matter. If all of those things were combined into one person, my hole was never going to be filled.
Yeah.
It's true, and it's important to have accountability, like Tristan was talking about earlier, with other people and having one-on-ones and meetings with others, even meeting with a counselor or a professional.
Yeah.
It's important, but it's more important to talk things through with your spouse.
Right.
I know Rachel and Whitney were talking, we mentioned in the first service, about how there's a website, Mansfield Moms or something, that women would talk on very openly about things that I thought, man, you need to be talking to your spouse about these things.
You're
Yeah.
spouting off on the internet
There
about
was-
what you're not satisfied
Yeah.
with.
Right.
to a bunch of other women
Right.
that they're not
There
going to
was
be
a
able to
post that
help
we
you.
read that had literally 586 comments, and a lady saying like, "Hey, ladies, my husband, he's not giving me what I need. He won't let me look at his phone, and he's watching porn all the time. What should I do?" And I'm like, "Why are you asking all of these ladies?
You should
Why
go and
don't you
talk to
go
him
talk
about
to
it.
him?"
Go to the right source.
And so it's all about communication. It's,
Yeah.
That's the common thread throughout marriage, but it's definitely the thread throughout your sex
So
life.
we've talked about communication in that aspect. Let's talk about it as it pertains to in the bedroom. Communication, how that works, like explaining.
Well, you got to talk about what you like and you don't like.
Right.
And so what's comfortable and what's not.
Yeah.
And what's too crazy for you.
Yeah.
Because what may be too crazy in one season may be really fun in the next season.
Right.
So you just got to
And
talk through all of that.
I think that what we are asking for has to be within the biblical context
course.
of biblical marriage. That if you want to take your spouse to some freaky sex club, well, I would tell you that being a swinger does not exist in the biblical context of marriage.
Right.
And so just because you saw that somewhere doesn't mean that that's something that's okay because you were both okay with it. I have a friend who was a good guy, loved Jesus, was living for God. He married a girl who was super pure. She was a virgin, but he had been addicted to pornography for years. And he called me the day after their honeymoon, and he said, "Man, we had a really hard time." And I said, "Well, why? What happened?" He said, "Well, I wanted her to do this, and I wanted her to do this, and I wanted her to do this." And she, like, freaked out on me. And I was like, "Right, bro, because she's not a porn star. That's why she's having a hard time." And so what happens is if we try to bring these unhealthy habits into the bedroom, of course that's not going to work.
I remember we talked to our premarital counselor before we got married, because growing up in church, you kind of are thinking, okay, what is okay and what is not okay? Am I only allowed to be fruitful and multiply in the missionary position at all times? Is that what I'm supposed to do?
Right.
And so we talked to our counselor because we wanted to make sure we were doing it right. And so doing it the right way is whatever. I took myself down that hole. Sorry. But he said, he was very specific. He said,
So many jokes and things
I know,
have
sorry.
that I have to just.
Stop. Done. Moving on. And so he just said, like he said, anything within the biblical confines of marriage
That we're both
that you're
comfortable
both
with.
comfortable with. And
Yeah.
so if you're asking your spouse to do something they're not comfortable with, then that's not okay, whether
Right.
it's in the Bible or not. But if you're both comfortable, then you're allowed and supposed to enjoy each other. That's why God gave us the gift of sex in marriage, so that we would love each other. That's like he said before, it's why it feels good, is because it's the way that we're intimate with one another. And
Right.
so God established it and created it so that we would want to connect. We would want to be intimate. The enemy's the one that screwed it all up and tries to get in between, but
Yeah.
we just gotta
So-
do it, y'all. Okay.
Let me say this. Here, you got something. What should people do in their marriage if sex is broken? If they find themselves in a season like we've all been in, where it's dried up or it's awkward and, oh, that time didn't go very good, and then, we've had a mistake or something. What do you do now?
You talk about it and you work through it. You get a friend like Kevin and April, and they take your kids, and you go somewhere and you talk through it, and you make sure that the next weekend or whatever, you don't have anything on your plate, and you literally work. For us, this is what we had to do, because what can happen in a season of brokenness is there can be this perpetual feeling of failure. And so I feel like I failed, and he feels like he failed, and so then it's really scary to start again. But in the communication of that and in trusting each other, you can say, okay, you know what, today we're going to be patient, we're going to be considerate, and we're going to communicate a bunch, and we're going to go from the conversation to the act of it, and we're going to work through it together. And no matter what it takes, no matter how awkward it is, no matter how weird it is, no matter if I screw up or if you do, we're going to just have sex with each other, because that's what God intended for our marriage.
Right.
Well, and if that's not, you do all that and you've covered it with prayer, it's not working out, then your next step is to seek an outside counsel
Yeah.
To help you process what's going on, what's the root of this,
And
Yeah.
sometimes, we're heavy into talking to counselors and going to a Christian counselor, but I think that there's also the other level of having some mentors in your life, of having a couple that you're in relationship with to go to them and say, hey man, here's where we are, here's what's happening, what do you think we should do? Because there's power in in a group of counselors and not just one voice or two voices, but saying, hey, here's where we are, what do we do?
And you go.
Okay. See, we're working it out. Who gets to go? Okay, so what I'm trying to do here, I know, okay. Said it. So what I want to say, though, with regards to just keeping that open communication, if it is broken, having people in your life that are willing, I'm a prude. Part of it is because of the things that I've experienced. Part of it is just my upbringing, all the different things. I don't usually talk. These guys have made me embarrassed more times than I can count, but they've also broadened my horizons. And you know what? This isn't something to be ashamed of. This isn't something that I should hide from, and that I've gotten to enjoy more freedom with my husband because of that. And I just want to encourage for you to understand sex is not dirty.
Right.
It's not. When it's between you and your spouse, when it is healthy, when you get to do the things that are comfortable to you and for you, it is a wonderful gift that helps to create that trust that you need when there are these seasons of brokenness where you can say, hey, I just need to be honest with you. And it is not an offense to them, because you don't want to offend your spouse. You don't want them to shut down and leave and choose to find someone else.
And it's not fun or easy to talk about something that's not working, especially in the bedroom, what we're talking about. It's not easy to talk to your spouse about it. It's certainly not easy to talk to others, your friends, or even a counselor. But in order for it to improve and get better, you have to communicate it.
Yeah,
You have to talk about
that's
it.
exactly what I was going to say. Was do you want to have an awkward conversation? For once, twice, a couple days, or do you want to have an awkward sex life for the rest of your life?
Right.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's you've got to put it in
Or
perspective.
that ends your marriage.
Yeah, so yes, it might be awkward. Yes, it might be hard, but it's worth fighting
Yeah,
for.
it's
And
true.
you're not
so you
alone
gotta
in
do
it. There's usually more times than not, other people are going through it too.
Well,
Yeah.
that's what was so shocking for us as we sat and talked, is that we talk about all the things, y'all, in our lives. Like, as friends, we sit and talk about all the things, but these two had not actually shared that part of their story with each other, that they both went and had blood work done. They both went until that moment, and we were like, why haven't we communicated this? Because for me and for Rachel, in those seasons, the shame and the fear that the enemy creeps in of, you're the only one, nobody else is struggling with this, you're a weirdo, gets really, really loud. And the louder it gets, the more insecure you get and the more separation there is. And so communication with each other, with a counselor, and with trusted people and advisors is so important. So important.
Break the cycle, talk about it, and do it. Go have sex with each other. It's really important.
And the single people.
Yeah,
What do we say
single
about
people. I was
them?
going to say we're already over, but let's talk about what a single person should do in the season of singleness.
I think they should make sure that in today's age where it's everywhere,
Yeah.
sex is prevalent in the society of today, they should make sure that they turn and cling to what's in the Bible, to cling to Jesus.
Pursue Jesus, yeah.
And pursue him. They have to.
And get
because
healthy.
Like Whitney said, it gets so loud, the world gets so loud and in your ear and in your face, that if you're not doing that, then the enemy's going to attack you and eventually wear you down.
Let today, if you've struggled and you're single and you've fallen, let today be the beginning of your new purity.
It's good, baby.
Because God's a God that redeems. And don't forget that he's a God of grace, but he's also a God of mercy, and that's undeserving. And so from today on, commit to God that you're going to strive to live a life of purity. That's what I did, and God blessed me with the best.
And find an accountability partner. Find somebody that you can be open and honest with.
Yeah.
And know, if you are in that relationship of accountability, you've got to know that it can't come with condemnation. But you've got to have that open dialogue.
That's good.
To get it out there.
So the goal of today was not to create shame over you. The goal is to show you we're just as broken as anything that maybe you're walking through. And so that God is not in heaven wagging his finger at you, mad at you for the things that you've done. But God loves you more than you can even imagine. And his desire is to make all things new. One of the things he wants to make new is your sex life and your marriage. So that it won't be owned by the devil. Because if it's not happening, the devil owns it. So go to the enemy's camp, take the thing that he stole, and proclaim victory over it.
Yeah. And
go on.
Right.
Yeah.
That's good.
I just have one more thing. as a church body, it's really, really easy to take your pastors and put them up on a pedestal and think that they can't sin or they can't do this. And if they're up here opening up and sharing this stuff that they've walked through and that they've struggled with, I hope you just know and understand like how amazing and important that is. Because though they're up here every day, like we're all just people and we all make stupid mistakes, but they're not hiding from them. They're not being a shepherd up on a hill. They're coming down amongst their sheep, and they're walking with us through it. And I think that is a very, very just amazing thing. So, thank you, guys.
So, a couple pieces. I love giving out homework. So, this is a good one. So, a couple pieces of homework. If you're married, this week your homework is go have sex with each other. That's the homework, right? If everything's good and healthy and fine, great. Go and have sex with each other. If it's broken and something has came into the marriage, talk about it, but not for too long, and then have sex with each other, right? And then work through that thing and know that God wants to bring you freedom. Another piece of homework would be if there's something that you need to confess, confess it. Pastor Brandon prayed a prayer over our church last week, and he prayed that if there's hidden sin, that would start to become exposed. That's not a prayer of anger or frustration. It's a prayer of knowing that God loves us. And so in pulling it from the darkness into the light, there can be a healing. So talk about it. And then if you're single, pursue Jesus, just like Aaron said. And then the last one is if you're a mom or a dad and haven't talked to your kids about it, talk to them. Yeah. Talk to them soon. Talk about, hey, here's my experience. Here's what the Bible says. Here's what I believe. And just start to open that dialogue. Let them know. If you ever have any questions, you can talk to me about it. And don't act all weird about it. Just talk with them. So I just want to pray for all the couples. Was this good for you today? Okay. It's hard to read. It's kind of hard to read. Like, I think it's good for everybody. So let me pray for you. God, we thank you for your love, and we thank you for the gift that you've given us of our sexuality. In the world that we live in, the devil has tried to come in and take sexuality and turn it and taint it and manipulate it into something that's not godly. He's trying to take what you've given us and make us think that it's bad. So, Father, I pray for every marriage here that you would bring healing, that you would bring restoration. Lord, that you would allow us to walk in the freedom and the blessing that you've given us. We believe that you're a God of more, that you desire for us to have a life of blessing and abundance. And one of those places is in our sexuality. And so today, we make the decision to take back the things the devil has stolen from us. And Father, if there's anyone here that's messed up, let them know that they're not alone, and let them know that, God, you love them, that you are a heavenly Father. We don't have to get cleaned up to go to God, but we go to God to get cleaned up. That, Father, you embrace us even when we're the dirtiest. You tell us in your word that while we were still sinners, while we were still a mess, it's in that moment that you died for us. And so, Father, if there's anyone here who feels far from you, who isn't in a relationship with you, God, let them know all they have to do is say, Jesus, forgive me my sins, come into my heart, cleanse me from my unrighteousness, and from today on, I'm going to live for you. And if they would pray that prayer, Lord, that they're saved, that they're forgiven, let them know that you love them. We thank you, Lord, for your goodness. In your name, we all said, amen.